Queen Mireille's massive wings beat slowly as she flew through the dark space toward her home. 3 months of fighting had left her tired and angry. The outer colonies had dared to rebel against her rule, and crushing them had taken longer than expected. Her scales, normally bright silver, looked dull in the starlight. The moon of Valthara came into view. Her crystal palace sat on the surface like a giant jewel, its walls reflecting the light from the nearby star. This was her home, her sanctuary. After months of war and death, she needed peace. She landed on the wide platform outside her palace. With a heavy thud, her claws scraped against the crystal floor as she folded her wings. The sound echoed in the empty space. Good. She had given all her servants time off while she was away. She wanted to be alone. Mireille closed her eyes and felt her body change. Her scales melted away, her wings disappeared, and her massive form shrank down to that of a tall woman with long black hair. This was her other shape, the one she used when she didn't want to break things just by moving. She walked barefoot through the halls of her palace. The crystal walls glowed softly, lighting her way. Everything was quiet, just as it should be. She headed toward her private rooms where she could rest and forget about the war for a while. But as she got closer to her workshop, she heard something that made her stop. The sound of metal hitting metal, the hiss of welding. Someone was working in her private space. Mireille felt anger rise in her chest. Who dared to enter her workshop? Her servants knew better. Even her guards were not allowed in that room. She kept her most important things there, including weapons that could destroy planets. She moved quietly down the hall, her bare feet making no sound on the smooth floor. The sounds got louder. Metal clanging, the buzz of power tools, and something else. Someone was humming. A simple tune, soft and cheerful. This made no sense. If someone was stealing from her, they wouldn't hum while doing it. If it was one of her engineers working on something urgent, they would be serious and quiet. But this person sounded happy, like they were enjoying their work. Mireille reached the door to her workshop. It was slightly open, and light spilled out into the hallway. She pressed herself against the wall and looked inside. What she saw made her freeze in shock. A human male sat on the floor in front of her most precious possession. The Starforge, a weapon her family had owned for thousands of years, lay partially taken apart on a clean cloth. Tools were spread around the human in neat rows. His dark hair fell over his eyes as he bent over the ancient weapon. The human looked young, maybe in his late 20s. He wore simple clothes that had seen better days. His hands moved with skill and care as he worked on the delicate parts of the Starforge. This was not some clumsy thief. This person knew what he was doing. Mireille watched as the human lifted a small crystal from the weapon. She knew that crystal well. Her best engineers had studied it for 50 years and declared it useless. They said it was just decoration, something pretty with no real purpose, but the human held it up to the light and shook his head. "No wonder you've been sick," he said softly and accented draconic. "This poor thing is clogged with 50 years of dust and bad energy." He reached for a bottle of clear liquid and began cleaning the crystal with a soft brush. His movements were gentle, like he was caring for something alive. Mireille had never seen anyone treat her weapon with such respect. The human continued working and humming. Sometimes he talked to the weapon like it was a friend. "There you go, that's better. I bet that hurt, didn't it? Don't worry, we'll have you feeling good as new." Hours passed. Mireille found herself unable to move from her hiding spot. She watched the human take apart systems that her engineers had been afraid to touch. He cleaned parts that hadn't been maintained in decades. He replaced worn pieces with new ones that he seemed to make from materials in her workshop. Most amazing of all, he was making the Starforge better. Mireille could see power flowing through the weapon in ways it never had before. The crystal parts glowed brighter. The metal pieces fit together more smoothly. The human worked through the night without stopping. He didn't seem tired or bored. He looked like someone doing what they loved most in the world. Every few minutes he would step back and examine his work, then nod with satisfaction before continuing. As dawn began to break through the crystal walls, the human put down his tools and stretched his arms. The Starforge lay before him, looking more beautiful than Mireille had ever seen it. Every part gleamed. Power hummed through it in perfect harmony. "There," the human said with a smile. "Much better. You must feel so much happier now." Mireille couldn't hold back her amazement any longer. A small gasp escaped her lips. The human's head snapped up. His dark eyes met hers across the workshop. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Mireille, the mighty dragon queen who had just spent 3 months destroying entire cities, felt like a child caught peeking at something she shouldn't see. The human didn't look afraid. He didn't try to run or make excuses. Instead, he carefully set down the tool he was holding and bowed his head respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said in calm, clear, draconic, "I'm sorry for entering your workshop without permission, but your Starforge was crying and I couldn't ignore that." Mireille stepped into the workshop, her heart beating fast. This made no sense. This human should be in prison. He should be working in the mines or waiting for execution like all the other rebels they had captured. Instead, he was here, in her most private space, talking about her weapon like it had feelings. "Crying?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The human nodded seriously. "Yes, Your Majesty. All machines have voices if you know how to listen. Your Starforge has been in pain for a very long time. It wanted to work properly, but it couldn't, so it cried." Mireille looked at her weapon, then back at the human. Everything she thought she knew about humans, about technology, about her own heritage, was beginning to change. Mireille stared at the human sitting calmly before her most precious weapon. His name came to her from the prisoner reports she had read during the war. Kiwan, 28 years old, a mechanic from one of the rebel colonies. He should be deep, underground in the prison mines, not here in her private workshop. "How did you get here?" she asked, taking another step into the room. Kiwan kept his head bowed respectfully. "The guards brought me here 3 days ago, Your Majesty. They said you needed someone to clean your workshop while you were away. I think there was some confusion in the orders. A mistake. Someone had mixed up the work assignments and sent a prisoner to clean her most secret room instead of a trusted servant. Any other day, Mireille would have been furious. Heads would roll for such an error. But right now, she was too amazed to be angry. "You were supposed to clean," she said slowly. "Not repair my weapons." "Yes, Your Majesty. But when I started cleaning, I heard the crying. It was so sad that I couldn't ignore it." Kiwan looked up at her with honest eyes. "I know I shouldn't have touched your things, but the Starforge was in so much pain." Mireille walked closer to examine her weapon. Even from a distance, she could see the difference. The Starforge had always been beautiful, but now it seemed to glow with inner light. Power flowed through its crystal channels like water through a stream. She had carried this weapon into battle for 200 years, and it had never looked like this. "My engineers have studied this weapon for decades," she said. They declared many of its parts broken or useless. How did you know what to fix? Kiwan smiled shyly. I listened to what it needed, Your Majesty. Machines are like people in some ways. When they hurt, they tell you where the pain is. You just have to know how to hear them. He pointed to a crystal component that lay gleaming on the cloth. Your engineers thought this was just decoration, but it's actually the heart of the whole system. It takes the energy from the power core and spreads it evenly through all the other parts. When it gets dirty or damaged, the whole weapon suffers. Irai picked up the crystal. It felt warm in her hands, alive with energy. For 50 years, her best scientists had poked and prodded this piece, unable to understand its purpose. Yet this human prisoner had figured it out in hours. The resonance frequency was completely wrong, too. Kiwan continued, warming to his subject. The crystal matrices weren't talking to each other properly, like musicians in an orchestra who can't hear the conductor. I had to retune everything so they could work together again. The technical terms he used were ones Mireille barely understood, even with all her royal education. How could a simple mechanic from a backwater colony know things that her imperial engineers did not? She watched as Kiwan began packing his tools. Away with the same care he had shown the weapon. Each tool went into a specific place in his bag. Nothing was rushed or careless. Even his cleanup showed the precision of a master craftsman. Where did you learn to work with biotech integration? She asked. Kiwan paused in his packing. Biotech integration, Your Majesty? The way the Starforge connects with its user's life force. That technology has been lost for 300 years. Only a few ancient weapons still use it. Oh, that. Kiwan shrugged like it was nothing special. All human machines work that way, Your Majesty. We don't build tools that fight against us. We build partners that want to help us succeed. This statement hit Mireille like a physical blow. Partners? Humans built machines that wanted to help them? Her entire understanding of technology was based on control and domination. You forced machines to obey you. You programmed them to follow orders without question. That's impossible, she said. Machines don't want anything, they're just tools. Kiwan looked genuinely surprised. With respect, Your Majesty, that's not true at all. Every machine has its own personality. Some are eager to please, some are stubborn, some are playful. You have to get to know them before you can work with them properly. He gestured toward the Starforge. Your weapon there is very proud and loyal. It wants to serve your family well. But it's also sensitive. When people treat it roughly or ignore its needs, it gets sad and can't perform as well. Mireille felt like her world was spinning. Everything she had been taught about technology, about the proper relationship between user and tool, was being turned upside down by this simple mechanic. Show me, she said suddenly. Your Majesty, show me how it works now. I want to see what you've done. Kiwan looked nervous for the first time. Your Majesty, I'm not sure that's wise. The Starforge is calibrated. For your energy signature, not mine. If I try to use it, I could damage both myself and the weapon. But Mireille was already reaching for the Starforge. She had held this weapon thousands of times. She knew its weight, its balance, the way it felt in her hands. Now, as her fingers closed around the grip, she gasped in shock. The weapon practically sang with joy. Energy flowed through it so smoothly that it felt like an extension of her own body. Every crystal hummed in perfect harmony. The power core pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. For the first time in her life, the Starforge felt truly alive. She looked at Kawan with new respect. This is impossible. No one understands biotech this well anymore. Maybe your people don't, Your Majesty, but humans never stopped learning how to listen to our machines. We have to. Our survival depends on making friends with the tools that keep us alive. Mireille set the weapon down carefully, her mind racing. If this one human could repair her most complex weapon so easily, what did that say about human technology? What did it say about the war they had just finished fighting? You said the Starforge was crying, she said quietly. What else in my empire do you think might be crying? Kiwan looked around the workshop, then back at her. His expression was gentle but serious. Your Majesty, he said softly, I think almost everything is crying. Mireille felt her breath catch in her throat. Almost everything was crying? She looked around her workshop with new eyes. The walls were lined with ancient artifacts, weapons, and tools that had been in her family for generations. Were they all suffering in silence? What do you mean? She asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Kiwan stood up slowly, brushing dust from his knees. He moved to a display case that held her second most precious weapon, a plasma rifle that had belonged to her grandmother. This one, for example, he said, pointing at the rifle without touching the case. It's very angry. The power cells haven't been properly balanced in decades. The targeting system is fighting with the firing mechanism because they're not getting the right signals from each other. Mireille opened the case and lifted out the rifle. She had used it in battle just last month. It had worked fine, or so she thought. But now, holding it after experiencing the perfect harmony of the repaired Starforge, she could feel the difference. The rifle felt tense, frustrated, like a musician forced to play out of tune. And that communications array, Kiwani continued, nodding toward a complex device on her workbench. It's lonely. It was designed to connect with other arrays across your empire, but it's been isolated for so long that it's starting to forget how to reach out. One by one, Kiwan walked through her workshop, diagnosing problems that her engineers had never even noticed. A shield generator that was overworking because its cooling system was ignored. A sensor array that was partially blind because its lenses hadn't been cleaned properly in years. A power distributor that was slowly burning itself out because nobody had listened to its warnings about overload. Each diagnosis was given with the same gentle tone Kiwan had used for the Starforge. He didn't speak about the machines as broken objects to be fixed. He talked about them like living beings who needed care and understanding. How can you tell all this just by looking? Mireille asked. I listen, Your Majesty. Every machine has its own voice. Some hum when they're happy. Some click when they're worried. Some get hot when they're angry. Once you learn to hear these voices, it's easy to understand what they need. Kiwan moved to her main computer terminal, a massive system that controlled many functions of the palace. He stood before it for a long moment, his head tilted like he was listening to something only he could hear. This one is very tired, he said finally. It's been running the same programs for hundreds of years without a break. It wants to learn new things, to grow and adapt, but it's trapped in old patterns that don't work as well anymore. Mireille activated the terminal. It responded, slowly, the way it always had. She had simply accepted this sluggish performance as normal, but Kiwan was right. The system seemed exhausted, going through the motions without any enthusiasm. Can you fix all of these things? She asked. I can help them, Your Majesty. But fixing isn't really the right word. These machines don't need to be fixed. They need to be understood. They need someone to listen to their problems and work with them to find solutions. This idea was so alien to everything Mirai had been taught that she struggled to accept it. In her world, you commanded, and things obeyed. You didn't negotiate with tools or ask machines how they felt. "This is not how we do things in the Dragon Empire," she said. "I know, Your Majesty, and that's why so many of your machines are unhappy." Kiwan's voice was respectful but firm. "You build wonderful technology, but then you try to force it to work in ways it wasn't designed for. It's like trying to make a bird swim underwater. It might work for a while, but eventually the bird will drown." Mirai walked to the window and looked out at her crystal city. From here, she could see the towers and spires that housed the Empire's greatest technological achievements. Power plants that fed energy to entire star systems, communication networks that connected thousands of worlds, defense systems that protected billions of lives. Were they all crying too? "Our technology has served the Empire for thousands of years," she said. "We've conquered half the galaxy with these tools." "Yes, Your Majesty, but think about what you could accomplish if your technology was truly happy to serve you. If every machine in your empire worked at its full potential, instead of just surviving." The thought was staggering. Miri's empire was already the most powerful force in the galaxy. If their technology could be improved by the methods Kiwan described, they would be unstoppable. But there was something else in his words that troubled her, an implication that she wasn't sure she wanted to face. "You said our machines are forced to work in ways they weren't designed for," she said slowly. "What did you mean by that?" Kiwan hesitated as if he knew his next words might be dangerous. "Your empire was built on conquest, Your Majesty, on taking things that belonged to others and forcing them to serve new masters. That includes the technology you captured from other civilizations." Mirai turned from the window to face him. "You're talking about the human colonies." "Among others, yes. Much of your empire's technology originally came from races that built their machines differently. They created tools that worked through cooperation, not domination. When you conquered those worlds and took their technology, you tried to make it work according to your principles instead of theirs." The truth of this hit Mirai like a physical blow. The Empire had indeed grown by absorbing the best technology from conquered worlds. They had always assumed that superior force was enough to make any tool serve their purposes. "Are you saying our entire approach to technology is wrong?" she asked. "Not wrong, Your Majesty, just limited. You've achieved incredible things with the methods you know, but there are other ways that might work even better." Kiwan moved back to the Star Forge and gently touched its surface. The weapon glowed brighter at his touch, as if responding to a friend. "This weapon was made by your ancestors using the old methods," he said. "They understood that the best tools are partners, not slaves. Somewhere along the way, that knowledge was lost. But it doesn't have to stay lost." Mirai stared at the glowing weapon, her mind spinning with possibilities. If Kiwan was right, if there truly was a better way to work with technology, then everything could change. Not just her personal weapons, but the entire empire. But accepting this would mean admitting that her people had been doing things wrong for centuries. It would mean acknowledging that the humans they had just finished conquering might have something valuable to teach them. "Show me more," she said finally. "I want to understand how this works." Over the next several hours, Kiwan became Mirai's teacher in ways she never could have imagined. He showed her how to listen to the subtle sounds that machines made when they were content or distressed. He taught her to feel the difference between forced obedience and willing cooperation in the tools she handled. "Put your hand here," Kiwan said, guiding her to touch a control panel on her communications array. Feel how the surface vibrates when you give it a command. Mirai pressed her palm against the smooth metal. When she activated the system the way she always had, with a sharp, demanding gesture, she felt the panel vibrate with what she now recognized as reluctance. The machine obeyed, but unwillingly. Now try asking instead of commanding, Kiwan suggested. Think of it as requesting help from a friend rather than ordering a servant. Mirai felt foolish, but she tried to change her approach. Instead of forcing her will onto the machine, she tried to communicate what she needed and why. To her amazement, the vibration changed completely. The panel hummed with what felt like eagerness to assist. "It responds faster this way," she said, in wonder. "And it will last longer, too," Kiwan explained. "Machines that work willingly don't wear themselves out fighting against their users. They can focus all their energy on doing their job well." They moved to the plasma rifle next. Kiwan carefully opened its casing to reveal the complex systems inside. Mirai had seen these components before during maintenance, but she had never really looked at how they worked together. "See how these two processing units are positioned?" Kiwan pointed to a pair of crystalline modules. "They're supposed to work as a team, sharing information back and forth. But look at the connection between them." The connection was a thick cable that looked sturdy and functional. Mirai couldn't see anything wrong with it. "The cable is fine for carrying power," Kiwan continued, "but it's terrible for carrying the kind of delicate signals these processors need to share. It's like trying to have a quiet conversation while standing next to a waterfall. They can hear each other, but not clearly enough to work together properly." He reached into his tool bag and pulled out a thinner, more delicate cable. "This will let them actually talk to each other instead of just shouting." As he made the replacement, Mirai watched the energy patterns in the rifle change. The two processors, which had been working independently, suddenly began to coordinate their efforts. The result was a smoother, more efficient flow of power throughout. "The entire weapon. Your engineers would have said the old cable was working fine," Kiwan said as he sealed the casing. "And they would have been right. But working fine and working happily are very different things." Mirai tested the rifle, firing it at a practice target across the workshop. The beam was brighter, more focused, and the weapon itself felt more balanced in her hands. The improvement was dramatic. "This is incredible," she said. "Why don't our engineers know these techniques?" Kiwan looked uncomfortable with the question. "With respect, Your Majesty, I think they do know. Deep down, anyway. But your culture doesn't encourage this kind of thinking." "What do you mean, in the Dragon Empire? Showing concern for the feelings of tools or machines would be seen as weakness, wouldn't it? Your engineers probably learned to ignore these signals because admitting that machines have needs would go against everything they were taught about proper authority." Mirai considered this. It was true that dragon culture valued strength and dominance above all else. Caring about the emotional state of a tool would indeed be seen as soft and foolish. "But humans think differently," she said. "We have to. When you're small and not very strong, you learn that cooperation works better than force. We've always known that our tools are partners, not property. Our survival has depended on that understanding." Kiwan moved to another device, a sensor array that monitored the space around the palace. As he examined it, his expression grew concerned. "Your Majesty, when was the last time this system was recalibrated?" "I don't know. Several months, perhaps." "Why?" "It's working much harder than it needs to. The sensitivity is set too high, so it's detecting thousands of tiny objects that don't matter. Space dust, small meteors, bits of debris. It's like a guard who tries to report every single ant that walks by instead of focusing on real threats. Kaiwan began adjusting the settings, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. If we tune it properly, it will use less power and give you more accurate information. Right now, it's so overwhelmed by irrelevant data that it might miss something important. As he worked, Mirai realized something troubling. If this system has been working poorly for months, that means our defenses have been compromised. An enemy ship could have approached without proper detection. It's possible, Your Majesty. The system was trying to warn you that it was overloaded. But those warnings probably looked like normal maintenance alerts to your staff. The implications of this were staggering. How many other systems throughout the Empire were crying out for help in ways that no one understood? How many potential vulnerabilities existed because machines were forced to work in ways that made them unhappy and inefficient? Kiwan, Mirai said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Of course, Your Majesty. During the recent war, when we were fighting the human colonies, were there times when our technology failed in ways that surprised us? Kiwan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and respectful. Your Majesty, I was just a mechanic on one small world. I wouldn't know about empire-wide military operations. But you would know about the machines we captured. You would know whether they worked the same way for us as they did for you. Another pause. No, Your Majesty. They didn't work the same way. Because we didn't know how to listen to them. Because you tried to make them serve in ways they weren't designed for. Many of our machines were built to work together as teams. When you separated them and tried to use them individually, they became lonely, confused. They did their best to obey your commands, but they couldn't perform at full capacity. Mirai felt a chill run through her. The war had been harder than expected. Human resistance had been more effective than their technology should have allowed. Now she was beginning to understand why. What would happen, she asked, if we tried your methods on a larger scale? If we taught our engineers to listen to machines the way you do? Kiwan smiled, the first truly happy expression she had seen from him. Your Majesty, I think your empire would become more powerful than you can imagine. And more importantly, it would become a place where both people and machines could thrive together. The possibility was both exciting and terrifying. But as Mirai looked around her workshop at the glowing, humming tools that Kiwan had helped, she knew there was no going back to the old ways. Teach me more, she said. I want to learn everything. 3 days passed in intensive learning. Mirai canceled all her royal duties and spent every waking hour in the workshop with Kiwan. He taught her to read the energy patterns that flowed through complex systems. He showed her how to recognize the difference between a machine that was merely functional and one that was truly thriving. Most importantly, he taught her to change how she thought about technology itself. Remember, Kiwan said as they worked on a damaged shield generator, you're not fixing a broken object. You're helping a friend who isn't feeling well. Mirai tried to apply this mindset as she carefully adjusted the generator's power flow. Instead of simply commanding it to work, she tried to understand what was making it struggle. The difference in results was remarkable. The shield that emerged was not only stronger but also used 30% less power. I'm beginning to understand, she said. But I still don't see how this could work across the entire empire. Training every engineer and technician to think this way would take generations. Not necessarily, Your Majesty. Once machines start working properly, they can teach other machines. Happy systems share their knowledge with struggling ones. If you fix the core problems in your major installations, the improvements will spread naturally. This was a concept that challenged everything Mirai knew about how technology worked. Machines teaching other machines, systems sharing knowledge without being programmed to do so. You're talking about artificial intelligence, she said. Independent thought in machines. Not artificial intelligence exactly, Kiwan replied. More like artificial empathy. When machines are designed to work together instead of in isolation, they develop ways to help each other succeed. It's not the same as human consciousness, but it serves a similar purpose. To demonstrate, he connected two communication devices that had been sitting unused in her workshop. As soon as the connection was established, both devices began humming softly. They're sharing diagnostic information, Kiwan explained. The newer one is telling the older one about improvements that have been made since it was built. The older one is sharing its experience about long-term stability issues. Together, they'll both work better than either could alone. Mirai watched in fascination as the energy patterns in both devices shifted and stabilized. It was like watching two people have a conversation, except the conversation was happening in frequencies she could barely detect. This is how human technology has always worked, Kiwan continued. We build machines that can learn from each other and adapt to new situations. That's why our colonies were able to resist your empire for as long as they did. Even though you had superior numbers and firepower, the admission hung in the air between them. Kiwan had just revealed that human technology had given the rebels a significant advantage in the war. In the old days, such knowledge would have made him too dangerous to live. But Mirai found herself more curious than angry. Show me more about how this adaptive technology works. Over the next several hours, Kiwan demonstrated techniques that seemed almost magical to someone raised in the dragon tradition of technological domination. He showed her how to create networks of devices that could reconfigure themselves to handle new threats. He taught her to build systems that could learn from their mistakes and share that knowledge with other systems across vast distances. Most amazingly, he showed her how to wake up dormant capabilities in technology she had owned for years. Your palace defense grid, for example, he said, pulling up a schematic on her main computer. It was originally designed by a race called the Kalari, wasn't it? Yes, we conquered their homeworld about 2 centuries ago. Their defensive technology was very advanced. The Kalari built their systems to work as a collective consciousness. Each defensive platform was designed to be part of a larger mind that could think strategically about threats. But your people have been using the platforms individually, like separate guards instead of a coordinated army. Kiwan's fingers moved quickly over the controls, activating connection protocols that Mirai didn't even know existed. Suddenly, her entire defensive grid came alive in a way she had never experienced. Instead of dozens of separate defensive platforms, she now had a single unified system that could think and plan. The improvement in response time and accuracy was immediate and dramatic. "This is incredible," she breathed. "Our defenses just became 10 times more effective. And this is just one example, Your Majesty. Throughout your empire, there are captured technologies that are working at a fraction of their potential because they're being used in ways that ignore their original design principles." Mirai realized she was facing a decision that would change everything. The knowledge Kiwan was sharing could revolutionize her empire's capabilities, but accepting it would mean admitting that her people's approach to technology had been fundamentally flawed for centuries. "There's something else you need to understand," Kiwan said quietly. "If you implement these changes, your people will become more powerful, yes, but they will also become more dependent on cooperation and mutual understanding. The old ways of ruling through fear and domination won't work as well when your tools require partnership instead of submission. This was the heart of the matter. Kiwan wasn't just offering technological improvements. He was suggesting a fundamental change in how the Dragon Empire operated. "You're asking me to change the very nature of my civilization," Mirai said. "I'm asking you to consider whether your civilization might be happier and more successful if it embraced cooperation instead of conquest." The question hung between them like a challenge. Mirai looked around her workshop at all the devices that now hummed with contentment instead of struggling with reluctant obedience. The evidence was overwhelming. Everything worked better when it was treated as a partner instead of a tool. But implementing such changes across an empire built on domination would be the greatest challenge she had ever faced. Her own nobles would resist. Her military commanders would object. Many of her subjects had been raised to believe that strength came from forcing others to submit. "If I were to try this," she said slowly, "where would we start?" Kiwan smiled. "With trust, Your Majesty. You would have to trust that cooperation can be stronger than control, and you would have to prove to your people that this trust is justified by showing them results they can't ignore. And you would help me do this? If you asked me to, yes. But not as a prisoner or a servant. As a partner working toward a goal we both believe in." Mirai stared at him. 3 days ago, he had been a captured enemy facing life in the prison mines. Now, he was offering to help her transform her entire empire, but only if she treated him as an equal. It was perhaps the most audacious proposal anyone had ever made to a dragon queen. It was also, she realized, exactly the kind of partnership that he had been describing all along. "Very well," she said finally. "Let's see if trust really can be stronger than control." The first test of their new partnership came sooner than expected. That afternoon, alerts began sounding throughout the palace. A massive solar storm was approaching the system, threatening to disrupt communications and damage sensitive equipment across several worlds. "This is perfect," Mirai said as she and Kiwan rushed to the main control center. "Let's see if your cooperative approach works better than our standard emergency protocols." The control center was in chaos when they arrived. Dozens of technicians were running between workstations, trying to coordinate the Empire's response to the storm. Ships were being recalled to safe harbors. Communication networks were being shut down to prevent damage. Entire cities were preparing to lose power. "Stop," Mirai commanded. The room fell silent. "Everyone step back from your stations." The head technician, a stern dragon named Ju Hyun, looked confused. "Your Majesty, we need to implement emergency procedures immediately. The storm will hit in 6 hours. "We're going to try something different," Mirai said. She turned to Kiwan. "Show them." Kiwan moved to the central control station, the massive computer system that coordinated responses across the Empire. Instead of diving immediately into the standard protocols, he placed his hands on the interface and closed his eyes. "What is he doing?" Ju-hyun whispered. "He's listening," Mirai replied. After a moment, Kiwan opened his eyes and began typing commands. But these weren't the usual emergency orders. Instead, he was activating communication protocols that most of the technicians didn't even know existed. "I'm asking all the systems across the Empire to talk to each other about the storm," he explained, as he worked. "Instead of shutting everything down, we're going to let them coordinate their own protection." On the main display, a map of the Empire appeared. Thousands of installations were represented as glowing dots. As Kiwan's commands took effect, Lines began appearing between the dots, showing communication links being established. "This is madness," Ju-hyun muttered. "Opening all those connections during a solar storm will just make the damage worse." But as they watched, something remarkable began to happen. The installations weren't just randomly connecting to each other. They were forming intelligent networks based on their capabilities and vulnerabilities. Power stations were linking with facilities that needed emergency power. Communication hubs were creating backup routes around areas that would be most affected by the storm. "They're organizing themselves," one of the younger technicians said in amazement. "More than that," Ki-won replied. "They're sharing resources and knowledge. The installations that have weathered solar storms before are teaching the newer ones how to protect themselves." Mirai watched in fascination as the Empire's technology transformed itself from a collection of individual systems into a unified organism. Instead of simply enduring the storm, they were actively adapting to meet it. When the storm hit, the results were beyond anything they had hoped for. Power fluctuations that should have lasted hours were corrected in minutes. Communication blackouts that normally affected entire sectors were avoided completely as traffic was rerouted through alternative networks. Equipment that should have been damaged was protected by neighboring systems that shared their shielding. "Damage reports?" Mirai asked when the storm had passed. "Zero critical failures, Your Majesty," Ju-hyun reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "Some minor fluctuations, but nothing that caused permanent damage. I've never seen anything like it." "This is just the beginning," Ki-won said quietly to Mirai. "Imagine what would be possible if we applied these principles to everything in your empire." Over the following weeks, word of the miracle during the solar storm spread throughout the Dragon Empire. Mirai began calling together her best engineers and administrators, carefully selecting those who might be open to new ideas. The resistance was significant. Many of her nobles saw Ki-won's methods as a threat to their traditional authority. Military. Commanders worried that cooperative technology might not respond properly to combat orders. Conservative engineers insisted that the old ways had served the Empire well for thousands of years, but the results spoke for themselves. Every system that was converted to the cooperative model performed better than before. Manufacturing facilities increased their output while using less energy. Defense installations became more effective while requiring fewer personnel. Even simple household devices worked more smoothly when they were treated as partners rather than tools. The key, Mirai explained to a gathering of provincial governors, is understanding that cooperation doesn't mean weakness. It means focusing all available strength toward a common goal instead of wasting energy on internal conflicts. Governor Minseo, an elderly dragon who ruled 3-star systems, raised an objection. "But Your Majesty, what happens when these cooperative systems decide they don't want to serve us anymore? If machines can think for themselves, what stops them from rebelling?" It was Ki-won who answered. "The same thing that stops people from rebelling against leaders they respect and trust. When machines are treated well and given meaningful work to do, they have no reason to resist. Rebellion comes from oppression, not cooperation." "And if they do rebel?" another governor asked. "Then we listen to their grievances and work together to solve the problems," Mirai said firmly, "just as we would with any valued partner." The transformation was not without challenges. Some systems resisted the changes, preferring familiar patterns even if they were less efficient. A few installations experienced temporary failures as they adapted to new operational methods. There were political difficulties as well, as some factions within the Empire saw the new approach as a betrayal of dragon values. But for every problem that arose, 10 improvements followed. The Empire's technology became more resilient, more adaptable, and more powerful than ever before. More importantly, the people who worked with this technology reported higher satisfaction and better results. 6 months after that first meeting in the workshop, Mirai stood in her transformed control center watching status reports from across the Empire. Every indicator showed improvement. Efficiency was up, failures were down, and innovation was accelerating at an unprecedented pace. "There's something else we need to discuss," Kiwan said, joining her at the observation window. "The other human colonies?" Mirai said, knowing what he was thinking. "Yes. They're still fighting against your expansion, and they're still suffering under the old technological paradigms in the territories you've already conquered. If this new approach is truly better, shouldn't we offer it to everyone?" It was the question Mirai had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The logical conclusion of everything they had accomplished was to extend cooperation beyond the Dragon Empire to include their former enemies. That would mean ending the conquest, she said, offering partnership instead of demanding submission. It would mean building something greater than an empire, Kiwan replied. A true alliance where every member contributes their best abilities toward shared goals. Mirai looked out at the stars, thinking of all the worlds under her rule and all the worlds still fighting against it. The old path led to endless conflict, with each victory requiring more force to maintain. The new path led to something unprecedented, a galaxy united not by conquest but by mutual benefit. "Very well," she said finally. "Let's see if the universe is ready for something it's never seen before." As she spoke the words, Mirai realized that she was no longer the same dragon who had returned exhausted from war just months before. She had learned that true strength didn't come from forcing others to submit, but from inspiring them to join willingly in something greater than themselves. The age of the Dragon Empire was ending. The age of the Galactic Alliance was about to begin. And it had all started with a simple human mechanic who knew how to listen to the voices of crying machines.